Hey there, dreamers. Welcome back to our channel. Before we drift into the classic journey of Vanessa Doofenshmirtz from Phineas and Ferb, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from tonight? And what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see how far and wide our sleepy little community reaches. All right, without further ado, lights low, blankets up, let's begin. The evening air in the city was unusually calm, as though the entire skyline had decided to take a deep collective breath and rest. From the large windows of the Doofenshmirtz apartment, warm golden light spilled gently into the night, soft and inviting against the backdrop of twinkling city towers. Somewhere in the streets below, cars hummed faintly, their engines muted by the distance, blending with the occasional rhythm of footsteps echoing on the sidewalk. For Vanessa, though, all of that felt far away. She had closed the door behind her just a few minutes ago, letting the cool air of the hallway slip away as she entered her own quiet sanctuary. She let out a soft sigh as she set her bag down near the door. Her father was already in his lab corner, or at least what he called a lab corner. To Vanessa, it looked more like a collection of wires, scrap metal, coffee mugs, and the occasional half-finished invention that probably wasn't going to work. He was muttering something under his breath, scribbling notes, tapping buttons, and occasionally dropping a tool that clattered loudly against the floor. Vanessa smiled faintly to herself. She was used to this rhythm. It was background music to her evenings, the hum of her dad's eccentric work. Always dramatic and always a little chaotic, but somehow comforting in its predictability. She didn't need to ask what he was building tonight. She could already guess it was another innator, probably something with an overly complicated name that would never quite function the way he intended. She slipped off her jacket and hung it neatly by the door, and then wandered into the kitchen to pour herself a glass of water. The coolness of the glass against her hands felt grounding after a long day. She leaned against the counter, sipping slowly, letting her shoulders relax for the first time since she'd walked through the door. The apartment itself wasn't fancy. The walls had seen better days, the furniture was mismatched, and half the time the floor seemed to be covered with spare parts from her dad's experiments. But there was something about it that always felt warm to her. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and on nights like this, when she could just breathe and exist without worry, it felt almost like the world outside didn't matter. She set her glass down and padded softly across the living room, her socks brushing against the cool floorboards. The glow of a small table lamp illuminated the corner where she usually curled up with a book or just sat in silence. Tonight the lamp was already on, casting golden shadows that danced gently across the walls. Vanessa moved toward it, pulling her hair into a loose ponytail, her eyes feeling heavier with every passing second. Her father glanced up briefly from his work, a screwdriver still in hand. "Oh, hey, Vanessa," he said absent-mindedly, as if just realizing she had entered. "Don't mind me. I'm on the brink of scientific history here. This is going to be my greatest invention yet." He tapped at something that made a small buzzing sound before quickly fizzling into silence. Vanessa chuckled under her breath. "Sure, Dad. Just don't blow up the kitchen again." He waved a dismissive hand, already absorbed back into his tinkering. "Oh, that was one time. Maybe two. But this time, it's foolproof. Absolutely foolproof." The gentle familiarity of their exchange made Vanessa feel a little lighter. She knew better than to argue. He'd spend the whole night convincing himself that whatever he was building was the key to his long list of grand plans. But for her, his enthusiasm was background like the ticking of a clock or the quiet hum of a fan, something to smile at but not to dwell on. Vanessa picked up a blanket from the back of the couch and wrapped it loosely around her shoulders. She walked toward the large window overlooking the city, pressing a hand against the cool glass. The night sky stretched endlessly above, scattered with stars that flickered faintly, half hidden by the haze of the city lights. Even so, the moon shone brightly, casting its silver glow over the rooftops. It was quiet, comfortably, beautifully quiet. And in that quiet, Vanessa began to feel her thoughts slowing down, the rest of her evening stretching out ahead of her like a soft, safe place to rest. Vanessa turned from the window, letting the silver-blue glow of the moon fade into the background as she drifted back toward the center of the room. Her father's muttering continued, a steady stream of half-formed sentences and triumphant declarations that ended in frustrated sighs. The clinking of metal and the occasional zap of electricity punctuated the otherwise calm atmosphere. But Vanessa didn't mind. If anything, it reminded her that she wasn't alone, that somewhere in the apartment, life was carrying on in its own quirky way. She loosened the blanket from her shoulders and folded it neatly across the couch, a small habit she'd picked up from her mother, who had always been particular about order. Vanessa had inherited some of that, even if she was far from perfect at it. In a place like this, tidiness felt like a small act of balance against her father's whirlwind of creative chaos. Her eyes flicked to the small bookshelf tucked between the couch and the window. It wasn't large, just a narrow wooden piece that leaned ever so slightly to the left, but it held enough to keep her company on nights like these. Spines of novels, journals, and a few well-worn magazines peeked out, each one carrying some memory of when she had first read it. She knelt down, tracing her fingers along the row of books, and paused on one she hadn't picked up in years, a slim volume with a dark blue cover, the pages slightly curled from age. She pulled it free and sank down onto the couch, curling her legs beneath her as she opened the first page. The words greeted her like an old friend. She didn't even need to read them quickly. Tonight wasn't about racing through a story. It was about letting the rhythm of sentences and paragraphs flow like gentle waves. Each line was a quiet lull, pulling her deeper into calm. Her father's voice rose again from across the room. "Vanessa, look at this. If this capacitor connects here, then the trajectory should... Oh, wait. Nope, that's not right. Never mind." Vanessa tilted her head with a small smile, not looking up from the page. "I'm sure it'll be amazing, Dad." He paused for a moment, glancing in her direction with a faint look of surprise, as though he'd forgotten she was listening. Then, with renewed energy, he went back to tinkering, muttering phrases that Vanessa couldn't quite make out. The sound blended with the soft rustle of pages turning. Together they filled the room with a kind of harmony, one voice of invention and one voice of quiet reflection. After a while, Vanessa closed the book, resting it against her chest. Her eyelids felt heavier, and she stretched slowly, arching her back and letting out a gentle yawn. She glanced at the clock on the wall, its hands ticking steadily past 9. The night was settling in deeper now. The noises from the city outside had grown even softer, replaced by the distant hum of traffic lights and the occasional bark of a dog somewhere far away. She rose from the couch, carrying the book with her as she made her way to her bedroom door. Her father didn't notice, or if he did, he didn't say anything. His focus remained locked on the glowing contraption in front of him, sparks of inspiration lighting up his face, even if the device itself flickered uncertainly. Vanessa lingered in the doorway for a moment, watching him. There was something oddly reassuring about it all, the persistence, the determination, the endless attempts to make something new. For all his quirks, her father's passion filled the apartment with a kind of strange warmth. She felt it even now as she turned the handle and slipped quietly into her own room. Her bedroom was dimly lit by the soft golden glow of a bedside lamp. The bed was neatly made, her pillows stacked with care, and a second blanket folded across the end. On her dresser, a small jewelry box sat next to a photo frame, the picture inside showing her younger self standing awkwardly next to her father in one of his many eccentric suits. She smiled faintly at it, shaking her head before setting the book down on the nightstand. She walked over to the window in her room and pulled the curtains halfway closed, allowing just enough of the moonlight to spill across the floor. The soft glow painted silver lines across the rug, a reminder that the world outside was still alive, even if her little corner of it was winding down. Vanessa slipped out of her shoes, neatly placing them by the dresser, and changed into her pajamas, a comfortable set of deep purple cotton that had become her favorite over the years. As she pulled the sleeves over her arms, she felt her body relax even more, as if the fabric itself signaled that the day was done. She sat on the edge of the bed, running her fingers absently along the blanket. The apartment was quieter here, her father's noises muffled by the walls, leaving only the steady hum of the city outside and the soft tick of the clock on her nightstand. It was the kind of quiet that wasn't empty but full of small comforts, memories, and the unspoken promise of rest. Vanessa lay back against her pillows, pulling the covers over her legs, and let out another sigh. Her thoughts were beginning to drift. She knew she wasn't ready to sleep just yet, but that didn't matter. For now, she could simply lie there, listening, breathing, and letting the gentle calm of the evening settle around her like a second blanket. Vanessa lay still for a while, gazing at the ceiling as the golden glow of her lamp flickered softly across the room. The shadows it cast stretched and shifted as though they were alive, gently swaying with the rhythm of her thoughts. She pulled the blanket up to her chest and tucked her chin slightly beneath its edge, breathing in the familiar scent of fresh linen. The day had been long, full of errands and conversations, little responsibilities that seemed endless at times. Yet now, in the stillness of her room, those thoughts no longer pressed heavily on her mind. They lingered only faintly, like distant echoes fading into the night. Vanessa always found this transition comforting, that delicate shift between the pace of the day and the quiet surrender of evening. She turned on her side, propping her head up slightly with one hand, and let her eyes wander across her room. Each object held a memory. The photo on her dresser reminded her of birthday parties with her dad, awkward but heartfelt. A small stuffed animal tucked into the corner of her shelf carried echoes of childhood nights when she had clutched it tightly to feel safe. Even the jewelry box, though rarely open now, was full of tiny mementos from different moments in her life. They were all pieces of her story, gathered like threads weaving into a tapestry. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. It was strange how comforting those little pieces could be, especially on nights when she felt the quiet so deeply. They were like lanterns glowing softly in the back of her mind, guiding her through the stillness. She reached over to her nightstand and gently switched the lamp to its lowest setting. The room dimmed into a soft amber glow, enough to see but not enough to disturb the peacefulness. The shadows grew longer, stretching across the floor like soft brushstrokes of the night. Outside her window, the city was hushed. Lights blinked steadily from distant buildings, and the faint hum of traffic was more like a whisper than a roar. Every so often, she could hear the flutter of wings from a bird settling on a nearby rooftop or the rustle of leaves carried by the wind. Those sounds blended into a kind of nighttime symphony, one that was both subtle and soothing. Vanessa let her eyes close for a moment, focusing only on her breathing. In and out, slow and steady, the air was cool, carrying a faint trace of the autumn evening, and she let it fill her lungs before releasing it again with a gentle sigh. Her mind, though restless at times, began to quiet itself, lulled by the rhythm of her own breath. A faint sound drifted through the walls, her father humming to himself. She could almost picture him in the living room, crouched over some contraption, completely absorbed in his own world. She imagined him fiddling with buttons, tilting his head in confusion, then cheering quietly when something worked even for a moment. That image brought a soft warmth to her chest. For all of his eccentricities, for all of the times he embarrassed her with over-the-top ideas, there was a kind of comfort in knowing he was there. His presence was steady in its own way, even if his inventions never were. Vanessa rolled onto her back once more, pulling the blanket up to her chin. The soft fabric brushed against her cheeks, and she nestled into the pillow. She thought of the conversation she'd had with her mom earlier in the week, casual and lighthearted. She thought of the friends she hadn't seen in a while, wondering what they were doing at this hour. These thoughts floated through her like drifting clouds, never lingering too long, never pressing too heavily. In the quiet, her body grew heavier with relaxation. She felt the day slipping away completely now, leaving only the comfort of the present moment. Her eyelids fluttered, and though she wasn't ready to fall asleep, she felt herself drifting close to that border between wakefulness and dreams. Vanessa reached once more for her book on the nightstand, flipping it open to where she had left off earlier. The words blurred slightly at first, her tired eyes adjusting to the print. But soon the sentences pulled her in again. Each line was slow and deliberate, carrying her further away from the day. She read without hurry, letting the story's calmness mirror her own. As the minutes passed, she placed the book back down and folded her arms beneath the blanket. Her room felt wrapped in stillness, like a cocoon keeping her safe from the bustle of the city just beyond the walls. It was a small world, her own quiet corner, and it was enough. Vanessa's book rested unopened now, her hand still on the cover as her thoughts drifted beyond the words on the page. She wasn't thinking about anything specific, just letting small memories and feelings wash over her like waves on a shoreline. It was the sort of quiet that didn't need to be filled, the sort that carried its own calm presence. The apartment around her seemed to exhale, too, as if settling into its own rhythm of night. Pipes in the walls clicked faintly as they cooled from the day's use, and the refrigerator hummed steadily from the kitchen. Her father's voice was still faintly audible, punctuated by little bursts of sound whenever something sparked on his workbench. None of it was disruptive. It was simply the texture of home, familiar and strangely soothing. Vanessa turned her head on the pillow, gazing at the window where the curtain let in just a sliver of silver moonlight. She could see the faint outline of her bookshelf against the wall, its shadows long and soft. The air felt cool against her face, but the blankets kept her warm, cocooned in their gentle weight. She tugged them higher, nestling deeper into their folds. A faint smile touched her lips as she thought about how different nights at her dad's place felt compared to her mom's. At her mom's, everything was tidy, quiet, and neatly arranged. Here there was always a kind of cluttered warmth, a sense that things weren't perfect, but they were alive. The two worlds contrasted, yet both belonged to her, and she found comfort in knowing she had a place in each. She stretched her legs under the blankets, feeling the cool sheets slowly warm beneath her. The softness of the fabric brushed against her toes, a small but reassuring detail. Her eyelids felt heavy again, not with sleep just yet, but with the kind of weariness that meant she was exactly where she needed to be. In the distance, a siren wailed faintly, its sound weaving through the city before fading again into silence. Vanessa listened to it until it disappeared, replaced once more by the quiet hum of the apartment. She thought about how large the city was, full of people still awake, each in their own little worlds. And yet, here in her room, everything felt small, contained, safe. Her thoughts wandered toward the future, as they sometimes did on nights like this. What would tomorrow hold? Another ordinary day, perhaps. Maybe a call with her mom, or a visit from a friend. Or maybe just another evening like this, calm, simple, wrapped in the little sounds and comforts of home. And that, she realized, was enough. She shifted onto her side again, curling slightly, and let out a soft sigh. Her father's voice carried one last time through the walls. Yes, it works. Oh, wait, no, it doesn't. His words made her laugh quietly to herself, the sound muffled against her pillow. Vanessa closed her eyes, letting her laughter fade into silence. The apartment grew still once more, as if honoring her need for peace. The ticking of the clock on her nightstand guided her breaths, steady and unhurried, in and out, each inhale blending seamlessly into the night. The lamp glowed dimly beside her, painting everything in amber light. Shadows of the curtains swayed gently, moved by a draft from the window. Beyond them, the moon continued its quiet watch over the city, casting silver reflections across the rooftops. Vanessa's final thought before drifting into that calm, waiting space between wakefulness and dreams was simple. This moment is enough. She didn't need answers or excitement or perfection. She just needed the stillness, the warmth, the sense of belonging in the quiet of her father's apartment. With that thought nestled softly in her mind, she let the night carry her further into rest. Vanessa lay still in the comfort of her bed, the lamp beside her casting a dim glow that seemed to soften the very edges of the room. The hum of the city had become a faraway whisper, and her father's tinkering in the other room had quieted, perhaps giving way to his own fatigue or another late-night distraction. In this calm, her mind began to drift not forward into the worries of tomorrow, but backward, toward the quiet corners of memory. Childhood memories had a way of sneaking in during nights like these, when the world was still and the heart was open. They came not in sharp, detailed recollections, but in soft brushstrokes, like colors bleeding across a canvas. Vanessa let them come, unhurried, as though she were paging slowly through an old photo album in her mind. She remembered the first home she could clearly recall, her mother's place. The smell of fresh laundry often hung in the air, mingling with the scent of the tea her mom liked to make in the evenings. She could almost hear the soft clinking of spoons against ceramic mugs, the way the steam curled upward and fogged the edges of the kitchen window. Vanessa, much younger then, would sit at the table, swinging her legs, waiting for bedtime stories or simply enjoying the quiet hum of her mother's presence. Those nights were always wrapped in a kind of gentle certainty. There was routine, a steadiness to the way everything unfolded. Pajamas neatly folded, stories read aloud, the glow of a lamp turned down at just the right moment. It was the kind of structure that made her feel secure even when she didn't fully understand why. Then came the weekends with her dad. They were always different. Nothing was quite predictable in his world, and yet that unpredictability became its own rhythm. She could still see him greeting her at the door with wild gestures and words that tumbled over one another in excitement. Sometimes he had balloons. Sometimes it was a bizarre invention he wanted to show her, and sometimes it was just a big smile and arms open wide. The apartment back then had felt even more chaotic than it did now. Projects scattered across tables, strange machines humming in corners, and the occasional burnt smell wafting from the kitchen when something went wrong. Vanessa, as a little girl, had learned quickly how to step carefully around wires and to hold her breath when her father announced that he had just about perfected something. Yet even in that chaos, she felt a different kind of comfort. It wasn't about neatness or order. It was about warmth, about knowing her dad always wanted her to be part of his strange little world. One memory surfaced more clearly than the others. A night when she couldn't sleep at her dad's place. She had been much younger, tucked into a bed that felt unfamiliar. Shadows had stretched across the ceiling, and the noises of the city had seemed louder than usual. She remembered tossing and turning, her small hands clutching the blanket tightly. Her father had noticed, of course. He came in awkwardly, still wearing his lab coat, holding what looked like a lamp that he had clearly modified in some way. "Don't worry, Vanessa," he had said in his usual dramatic tone. "This is my patented anti-nightmare innator. It guarantees no bad dreams. Absolutely none." The lamp had flickered uncertainly, buzzing faintly, before casting a very uneven light against the wall. It hadn't exactly worked the way he promised, but Vanessa remembered how he sat at the edge of her bed, patting her hand gently. "See? Perfectly safe. You'll sleep just fine," he had whispered before tiptoeing out. And she had. Not because of the invention, but because of his presence, the way he cared enough to notice her fear and try in his own peculiar way to make it better. Now, lying in her room years later, Vanessa smiled faintly at the memory. Childhood had been a mix of contrasts, her mother's steady calm, her father's unpredictable warmth. Both had shaped her, teaching her different ways to feel safe in the world. Her eyelids grew heavy, but the memories continued to drift gently, one after another, weaving themselves into the quiet of the night. The longer Vanessa lay still, the more the memories blossomed, as if her thoughts had opened a hidden drawer of her past. She let them come, not rushing, just floating gently through them like walking slowly down a familiar street. She remembered afternoons at the park, small hands clutching the swing chains as her father gave her a push. He had never been the kind of parent to stand silently and watch. No, he was the one to narrate the whole adventure as if she were on some grand expedition. "Higher, Vanessa. You are soaring into the stratosphere. Any minute now you'll spot satellites," he would exclaim, arms flailing in the air with his usual dramatic flair. She would laugh, gripping tightly to the swing, the breeze lifting her hair as the sun glowed warmly overhead. At the time, she had rolled her eyes, embarrassed if anyone else in the park looked over. But even then, even as a child, she knew she loved those moments. The sound of his excitement made her feel special, as though even the ordinary act of swinging became extraordinary when he was around. Other memories drifted in afternoons baking cookies with her mother. Her mom's kitchen was always spotless, the counters gleaming, the utensils lined neatly in drawers. Vanessa had loved perching on a stool, spoon in hand, carefully following instructions. Her mother's voice was calm, guiding her step by step. Vanilla and cinnamon would linger in the air, and when the cookies were ready, the whole house seemed to glow with warmth. It was such a contrast to her father's cooking attempts, which usually involved smoke detectors and frantic waving of towels. Still, she remembered both with fondness. From her mother, she learned patience and precision. From her father, she learned that sometimes chaos could still lead to laughter. Her mind wandered next to birthdays. At her mom's, the parties were small and sweet. A few close friends, a cake decorated with careful frosting, candles lit, while voices sang softly. At her dad's, however, birthdays had a way of becoming events. Once he had tried to build a self-frosting cake-inator that unfortunately covered the entire kitchen in whipped cream. Another year he had arranged for a mechanical parrot to deliver her presents, but it malfunctioned halfway and had to be coaxed into landing. At the time, she had groaned, embarrassed by the disasters. But now, looking back, she felt the corners of her lips curl into a smile. There was sincerity in all of it, a father trying in the only way he knew how, even if it came out messy. One particularly vivid memory surfaced. She was around 6 years old, spending a rainy afternoon at her dad's apartment. The thunder outside had frightened her, the windows rattling with every boom. She had sat curled up on the couch, trying to distract herself with a coloring book. Her father had noticed right away. Without a word, he had dashed off into his lab corner and returned minutes later with what he called his cozy cloudinator. It was essentially a lamp with cotton glued haphazardly on top, glowing with soft light and making a faint whooshing sound. He had placed it beside her on the couch and announced, "There, see? Now the storm isn't outside. It's right here, and it's friendly." The invention had been ridiculous, of course, but the effect had been immediate. She had stopped trembling, leaning against his side as he draped an arm around her shoulders. Together they had listened to the rain, and for the first time that night, she had thought the storm sounded less frightening, almost beautiful. The memory warmed her chest as she lay in bed. Childhood had been filled with these moments, little snapshots that stitched themselves into who she was now. Her mom had given her calmness, order, and gentle strength. Her dad had given her laughter, resilience, and the ability to find comfort in imperfection. The two worlds were different, but both had been hers, and as she thought about them now, she realized how grateful she was for that balance. Her breathing slowed, steady and deep. The room seemed to glow a little softer as her eyelids drooped, but the memories kept flowing, each one a lullaby, pulling her closer to sleep. As Vanessa nestled deeper under her blanket, another memory surfaced, one that made her chest ache with quiet fondness. It was of Perry, back when she was younger and still growing used to her father's peculiar pet. She remembered the first time she had really paid attention to him. Perry had always been there, waddling around the apartment, silent but steady, his teal fur a splash of calm against the constant chaos of her dad's experiments. One evening, when she had been about 9, she had sat on the floor after a long day, feeling upset about something she couldn't even remember clearly now. Perry had patted over without hesitation, curling up near her knee. He hadn't made a sound, hadn't tried to distract her with silly antics like her dad often did. He had just been there, solid and quiet, a reminder that sometimes presence was enough. From that day on, she had come to appreciate him as more than just a pet. He was a little guardian, a quiet companion who never judged and never intruded. Many nights she would find him at the foot of her bed, his tiny body rising and falling with each soft breath, and she would feel safer because of it. Thinking of Perry now brought warmth to her heart. She could almost picture him wandering the apartment at this very hour, checking corners as if keeping watch, before finding a comfortable place to settle down. Other memories of small adventures came tumbling in after that. Summer afternoons when her dad had insisted on taking her to the boardwalk, declaring that he would win the biggest prize from the game stalls, only to return with a tiny keychain after hours of trying. Vanessa had rolled her eyes, but she had secretly kept the keychain for years, attaching it to her backpack as a reminder of the day. She remembered evenings when she would visit her mom and help tend the garden. Together they had planted flowers along the fence, carefully patting the soil into place and watering them just enough. Vanessa had learned patience in those moments, the art of waiting for something small to grow, trusting it would bloom in its own time. And there were quiet afternoons when she sat in her room with music playing softly, sketching pictures in a notebook. Sometimes they were doodles, sometimes more serious drawing, but always they carried her thoughts, her feelings. Looking back, she realized those sketches had been her way of finding calm away to process the mixture of order and chaos that made up her life. Her childhood had been full of contrasts, but it had also been full of love. She saw it now more clearly than she had at the time. Back then, she had sometimes wished things were simpler, less messy. She had wanted one world, one way of living. But as she grew older, she saw the beauty in having both her mom's steadiness, her dad's spontaneity, and the quiet loyalty of a teal platypus who asked for nothing but gave so much. The memories played like a film reel behind her eyelids. She could see the swing sets, the rainy days, the cookies baking in her mom's oven, the clutter of inventions in her dad's living room, and Perry's quiet gaze always watching over it all. Vanessa's body sank deeper into the mattress as the weight of those memories settled into her like a blanket of their own. They didn't stir longing or regret, only peace, a gentle acknowledgement that her past had shaped her with kindness, even if it hadn't always felt perfect at the time. Her breathing grew slower. The city outside seemed to dim even further, as though honoring her journey inward. She thought of how childhood felt distant now, yet still alive in her heart. It wasn't gone. It had simply become a part of her, waiting quietly in moments like this to remind her of where she had come from. And with that reminder came comfort. Vanessa shifted slightly under her blankets, her body sinking deeper into their warmth as her mind lingered in the haze of memory. The flow of recollections was like a dream within waking. Not sharp or rigid, but soft, blurred at the edges, a watercolor of her past spreading across her present. She thought of times when she was younger, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her toys arranged neatly in a circle. Her dad would sometimes plop down beside her, far too big for the tiny play space, and enthusiastically ask what he could build for her toys to make their lives easier. It usually ended with blocks stacked precariously into some elaborate tower or a miniature cardboard contraption that collapsed within minutes. She had rolled her eyes even then, but she remembered the way his laughter filled the room and how it always drew out her own. The sound, another memory shimmered faintly, her mother reading to her before bed. The sound of her voice had been calm, steady, like waves lapping against the shore. Vanessa had loved the way the words carried her into other worlds, the way her eyelids grew heavy as her mom's voice softened toward the end of a story. Those evenings had taught her that peace could be found in stillness, that sometimes the quietest gestures held the most weight. She smiled faintly in the dim glow of her lamp, realizing how much of herself had come from those two halves. Her father's energy had given her the ability to laugh at imperfections, to see beauty in chaos. Her mother's steadiness had shown her how to breathe through life's storms, how to find calm even when the world felt noisy. And Perry, in his own quiet way, had been the silent bridge between those two worlds, a companion who reminded her that presence alone could be a comfort. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how those moments had followed her into adulthood. The patience from afternoons baking cookies had carried into the way she approached challenges. The resilience learned from her father's endless failures had taught her not to fear mistakes. Even the quiet nights listening to the rain had shaped her ability to find beauty in what once felt frightening. Her chest rose and fell slowly, her thoughts unraveling into something lighter now, more like a dream than memory. The line between past and present blurred until the child she had once been seemed to curl beside her in the same bed, safe and content under the same blankets. The ticking of her bedside clock guided her into deeper calm. Each second felt like a soft step into sleep, steady and sure. She blinked slowly, her eyelids heavier than before, the golden glow of the lamp blurring into warmth. Vanessa's last thoughts were not of regret or longing, but of gratitude. Gratitude for her mother's care, her father's endless, eccentric love, and the quiet companionship of a teal platypus who never asked for recognition. Her childhood had not been perfect, but it had been hers, and it had been enough. With that realization, her body surrendered fully to rest. The memories folded themselves gently away, like pages closing in a well-loved book. All that remained was the quiet of the apartment, the hum of the night, and the steady comfort of knowing that the past lived safely within her, guiding her into tomorrow. The lamp flickered softly, shadows stretching across the walls, and Vanessa drifted into the calm embrace of sleep, carrying her memories with her into dreams. The night had settled fully by the time Vanessa stirred again. Her eyes fluttered open in the soft amber glow of her lamp. The room hushed except for the faint tick of the clock and the muffled hum of the city below. For a moment she simply lay there, cocooned in her blanket, listening to the quiet. But then a gentle thought nudged her, the call of the balcony. She slipped the covers back with care, not wanting to disturb the fragile stillness, and swung her legs slowly over the side of the bed. Her toes touched the cool floor, grounding her as she reached for her robe draped across the chair. She slipped it on, the fabric falling loosely around her, and padded softly across the room. The curtains swayed slightly as she pulled it aside, revealing the tall glass doors that led to the small balcony. Moonlight pooled faintly across the floorboards, inviting her closer. She pressed her palm gently against the glass for a moment, savoring its chill, before sliding the door open with the quietest of creaks. A rush of cool air brushed against her skin, carrying with it the faint scents of the city, a mix of concrete after a long day's warmth, a trace of rain lingering from earlier showers, and the distant sweetness of flowers from a nearby window box. Vanessa stepped outside, the night folding around her like a soft cloak. The balcony wasn't large, just enough for a chair and a small table, both a little weathered by years of use. But it was hers, a small perch from which to gaze at the city stretched endlessly beyond. She leaned against the railing, the cool metal pressing against her arms as her eyes lifted toward the sky. Above her, the moon hung in perfect stillness, round and radiant. It painted silver highlights along the rooftops, turning ordinary chimneys and antennas into quiet silhouettes against the heavens. A scattering of stars peeked between the city lights, faint but determined, like shy whispers refusing to be silenced. Vanessa inhaled deeply, filling her lungs with the crisp night air. The sounds of the city were gentler here, the occasional car rolling down the street below, its headlights gliding silently like fireflies. The faint murmur of voices from a couple walking somewhere in the distance. The rhythmic buzz of a street lamp, its glow pooling across the sidewalk. None of it felt intrusive. It was simply a language of the night, steady and calming. She tilted her head back, letting the moonlight spill across her face. For a moment she closed her eyes and simply stood there, listening. The hum of the world blended with her own steady breathing until the two became one. Her thoughts wandered gently, as they often did on the balcony. She thought of the people still awake in the apartments across the street, a light glowing faintly here, a shadow moving there. Each window held a life, a story unfolding quietly in parallel with hers. It reminded her of how vast the city was, and yet how intimate the night could feel when she stood here, tucked into her little corner of it. The cool breeze stirred her hair, carrying it across her face in delicate strands. She tucked them back behind her ear and rested her chin on her hand, gazing out across the rooftops. The city felt endless but not overwhelming. Tonight it was softened by the glow of the moon, subdued and gentle, as if even its heartbeat had slowed to match hers. Vanessa let her shoulders relax, leaning more comfortably against the railing. The day's weight had melted away hours ago, but now even the faint remnants of thought and memory seemed to drift off into the air around her. The balcony had always been a place for release, a quiet refuge where she could simply exist without the need to be anything at all. She exhaled slowly, her breath a soft mist in the cool air. And as she stood there, wrapped in moonlight and night sounds, she felt that familiar sense of peace settle over her like a blanket. Vanessa's eyes traced the rooftops stretching toward the horizon. Each one looked slightly different, some with slanted shingles, some flat and square, some cluttered with satellite dishes or rusted pipes. Yet under the moonlight, they all seemed to belong to the same quiet painting, softened by silver glow and distance. Below, the streets told a slower story than the day ever allowed. The crowds had long since vanished, leaving behind wide patches of silence broken only by the occasional sound of footsteps. A cat slipped along the curb, its movements sleek and unhurried, pausing once to glance up at her balcony as if acknowledging her presence. Its eyes gleamed faintly before it disappeared into the shadows, vanishing as though it had been conjured by the night itself. Somewhere farther off, a faint melody drifted through the air. A musician, perhaps, strumming a guitar in the quiet of their own balcony, letting the notes float outward into the city. The sound was soft, distant, but it carried with surprising clarity, weaving itself into the natural hum of traffic and wind. Vanessa tilted her head, listening, smiling faintly as the tune melted into the atmosphere. It wasn't a performance, not something meant for applause. It was simply someone else, awake and alive, adding their rhythm to the lullaby of the night. She drew her robe closer around her shoulders, savoring the embrace of the fabric against the cool air. The warmth of her room still clung faintly to her, but out here she welcomed the contrast. It made her feel awake and grounded, as though the night itself was breathing with her. Her gaze shifted upward again, searching the sky. The moon still reigned above, but her eyes caught on a small cluster of stars hiding between the clouds. They were faint, almost shy, but she admired their persistence. In a city flooded with artificial light, stars had to fight to be seen, and yet here they were, twinkling softly, their glow fragile but unyielding. That thought lingered with her. Persistence, quiet strength. The kind that didn't demand attention but endured anyway. She thought of how her own life had been filled with those moments, times when she had kept moving forward even when things felt heavy, even when she wasn't sure where she was headed. Like the stars above, she had kept shining in her own small way, even when the world around her felt too bright, too noisy to notice. The balcony railing was cool beneath her fingertips as she ran them along its surface absent-mindedly. She thought of how many nights she had stood here before, watching the city unfold. Sometimes she had come out seeking answers, hoping the night would somehow whisper them to her. Other times she had come simply to breathe, to let her thoughts stretch out into the open air where they seemed lighter, less sharp. Tonight felt different, though. There was no urgency in her thoughts, no ache or question pressing on her heart. Tonight was gentler. It was as though the memories she had wandered through earlier had prepared her for this moment, softening her edges, reminding her that peace wasn't found in searching, it was found in allowing herself to simply be. The city seemed to agree. Its rhythm was steady, calm, like a slow heartbeat beneath her balcony, the occasional flicker of headlights, the echo of a distant door closing, the rustle of leaves stirred by the wind. It was all part of the same song, not loud, not demanding, just there. A constant, quiet reassurance. Vanessa leaned her cheek against her hand, her eyelids growing heavier as she gazed outward. The skyline blurred slightly, not from distance, but from the way her eyes softened with fatigue. Still, she didn't move. Not yet. The night felt too inviting, too comforting to leave just yet. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sounds and cool air wrap around her like an invisible blanket. In that stillness, it felt as though the city wasn't outside her, but part of her, its pulse matching her breath, its lullaby guiding her slowly toward rest. Vanessa's gaze shifted from the sky to the glowing windows scattered across the buildings opposite her. Some glowed brightly, golden squares against the dark brick. Others flickered faintly, as if the light within was hesitant to shine too long. Each one caught her attention, little pockets of life quietly unfolding. She imagined the people inside. One window, high up and to the left, showed the faint silhouette of someone moving around a kitchen. Maybe they were making tea, the kind of late-night ritual she herself enjoyed when sleep didn't come easily. She pictured them standing by their counter, steam rising from a mug, the warm scent filling the air as they cradled it in both hands. Another window, lower and across the street, glowed softer pale blue instead of warm yellow. A television flickered inside, its glow bouncing across the walls. She imagined someone curled on their couch, wrapped in a blanket, watching quietly with tired eyes until the weight of sleep pulled them under. Even the smallest lights drew her curiosity. A single lamp near the far end of the block, glowing steadily on a desk. She thought of a student hunched over their books, maybe scribbling notes, maybe pausing every now and then to glance out the window at the same moon she now admired. Did they also pause just to breathe? Did they find the night as comforting as she did? Vanessa smiled faintly. There was something soothing about it, knowing that all around her, in the hush of midnight, countless stories were still unfolding. Some joyful, some mundane, some quiet in their loneliness. And yet they were all bound together by the same blanket of night, the same sky watching over them. Her thoughts softened further as she leaned against the railing. She thought of how she herself must appear from the outside. If anyone across the way happened to look up, they'd see her a slim figure draped in a robe, leaning quietly against a balcony. Maybe they'd wonder about her story. Maybe they'd picture her lost in some dramatic thought, when really she was just enjoying the air, the stillness, the peace of being here now. She liked that idea that strangers could glance at each other's glowing windows and imagine lives for one another, not with judgment, not with envy, but with simple curiosity and quiet respect. The night invited those kinds of thoughts, gentle connections between souls who would never meet. Her eyes drifted back to the skyline. Beyond the windows, the taller buildings loomed, their edges outlined faintly in silver. Some office towers still had lights burning on their upper floors, their reflections shimmering faintly on the glass. Even in those spaces where long hours stretched on, there was life, effort, persistence. The city never truly stopped, but it didn't feel restless tonight. It felt steady, like each light was a heartbeat adding to the calm rhythm around her. Vanessa let her eyes close halfway, her breathing slow and even. She thought of her father somewhere inside, probably tinkering with some half-finished invention. She thought of her mother, whose evenings were different, but steady in their own way. She thought of herself, suspended between both worlds, yet finding her own small rituals, like standing here on this balcony, letting the moonlight hold her while the world continued quietly below. The railing was cool against her arm, the air gentle on her face. It was as though the night itself had leaned down to embrace her, reminding her that she was part of something vast but kind. And in that embrace, Vanessa felt her own edges blur her worries, softening, her thoughts melting into general shapes. The windows across the way continued to glow, silent companions in the dark. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel apart from them. She felt connected, quietly, through the shared rhythm of living, breathing, resting beneath the same sky. Vanessa lingered a little longer, her fingers tracing along the cool railing, her gaze wandering once more to the moon that still held its place above the city. It glowed as if it had been waiting only for her, casting its silver touch across rooftops, windows, and quiet streets. She drew in a slow breath, feeling her chest rise and fall in time with the hush of the wind. The air had grown cooler, and though it wasn't uncomfortable, she could sense the way the night wrapped itself around her like a whisper. She thought again of the stars faint, but determined and let herself smile at the small reminder they gave her, that even the quietest presences still mattered. Her thoughts drifted back over the memories she'd carried earlier in the evening. Childhood laughter, the sound of her mother's voice, the strange, chaotic inventions her father had built had somehow filled their home with more warmth than frustration. Each memory felt less like a sharp picture now and more like soft echoes fading into the background of the night, but never gone. They were with her, shaping her even as she leaned here now. A faint sound caught her ear, the creak of a window somewhere below, followed by the muted clink of glass. Someone else was awake, perhaps sipping water, perhaps looking briefly at the same sky before retreating back inside. The realization brought her comfort. She wasn't truly alone out here. The city breathed with her, alive in its small gestures, its tiny reminders of life carrying on in every direction. Her eyes grew heavier as she rested her chin in her hand, the city blurring in her view. The hum of the streets had softened into something more distant, more dreamlike. Even the music she'd heard earlier, faint guitar chords drifting through the air, seemed to dissolve now, leaving only the steady rhythm of silence. She realized it was time. The balcony had given her what she needed: space, perspective, the quiet reassurance of the world continuing gently around her. But the night was tugging her towards something deeper now, the kind of rest that came only when she surrendered fully to it. With a final glance upward, she whispered a quiet goodnight to the stars, to the moon, to the softly glowing windows across the way. It wasn't a dramatic farewell, just a small acknowledgement of the comfort they had shared with her in this moment. She turned back toward the sliding glass door, her bare feet brushing against the cool balcony floor as she stepped inside. The warmth of her apartment greeted her instantly familiar, steady. She pulled the door shut, muffling the outside world into a soft hum, and let the golden glow of her lamp guide her back toward her bed. The transition from balcony to bedroom felt like stepping between two worlds, one wide and endless, filled with stars and rooftops and strangers' windows, and one small but no less important, where blankets waited and dreams could unfold. She found herself grateful for both. Vanessa slipped back beneath her covers, the fabric welcoming her, as though it had been waiting all along. She adjusted her pillow, settling deeper into its comfort, and let her body sink fully into rest. The chill from the balcony faded, replaced by the gentle warmth of her room. Her eyelids fluttered, the quiet of the city still echoing in her ears, blending seamlessly with the silence of her home. She exhaled slowly, her breath steady, her mind calmer than it had been in days. And as the last of her waking thoughts drifted away, she carried with her the peace of the balcony and the soft glow of windows and the reminder that she was always part of something larger, something kind. The night had held her gently, and now it released her into the soft embrace of sleep. The soft weight of her blankets had almost convinced Vanessa to stay tucked in for the night, but a small thought nudged her awake again. She wasn't quite ready to let the evening go. There was still one ritual left, one that always made her feel at peace before sleep: a cup of tea. She slipped from her bed with quiet steps, the wooden floor cool under her feet, as she padded toward the kitchen. The apartment was hushed except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the building settling into the night. She liked these sounds, subtle reminders that the world went on in its own rhythm, even as people slept. In the kitchen, she flicked on a small lamp, its golden glow spilling gently across the counters. The air felt different here, carrying the faint scent of herbs from the jars lined neatly on a shelf. Vanessa reached for her favorite mug, the one with tiny painted stars circling its rim, and set it beside the kettle. Filling the kettle was part of the comfort. The sound of water rushing and splashing lightly against the metal container was soothing, like a stream running through the quiet forest of her mind. She placed it carefully on the stove and clicked it on, the low hum beginning immediately. While she waited, she leaned against the counter and let her eyes drift to the window above the sink. The glass reflected her face softly, overlaid against the night sky beyond. It reminded her of the balcony, that same silver moon, the same stars still watching. She thought of the glowing windows she'd seen earlier, of the imagined lives inside them. Somewhere out there, maybe someone else was making tea, too. The thought made her smile faintly. The kettle began to murmur, a faint bubbling building slowly toward a boil. Vanessa liked this part best, the anticipation, the promise of warmth in a few moments. She chose a calming blend from the shelf, chamomile with a hint of lavender, and placed the tea bag gently into her mug. The steam soon curled upward as she poured the water, the faint aroma rising instantly into the air. It was like breathing in calm itself. She cradled the mug in her hands, feeling the gentle heat radiating through the ceramic. That warmth seeped into her fingers, soothing and steady. She lifted it carefully, letting the steam brush against her face before taking the first sip. The taste was soft, floral, grounding the kind of flavor that seemed to remind her body that it was safe to let go, safe to rest. The silence of the kitchen deepened, broken only by the occasional tick of the cooling kettle. Vanessa let her shoulders relax, sinking into the chair near the small table. The glow from the lamp cast a circle of light around her, while the rest of the apartment remained shadowed, hushed. It felt like the world had shrunk down to just her, the tea, and the night. And then softly, there was the faintest sound of padded feet. Vanessa glanced toward the doorway, and her expression softened instantly. Perry had wandered in, his teal fur slightly tousled, his small, steady eyes blinking in the light. He didn't make a sound. No secret agent sharpness now, just the quiet presence of a pet checking in. Without hesitation, he padded across the kitchen floor and curled himself at her feet, tucking his bill against his chest. Vanessa reached down, brushing her fingers gently across his back. "Hey, Perry," she whispered, her voice calm, fond. He gave no reply, of course, but she didn't need one. His presence was enough, warm, loyal, grounding her even further in the calm of the night. Together they sat there in the golden circle of light, the steam of the tea rising between them, the silence of the apartment wrapping them in its gentle embrace. The tea's steam drifted upward in slow curls, dissolving into the dim light. Vanessa let her hands rest around the mug, savoring each breath of the floral aroma before taking another sip. Every swallow left behind a warmth that spread gently through her chest, loosening any tension that had clung to her since the day began. At her feet, Perry had already settled into stillness, his teal body curled into a perfect circle of calm. His steady breathing was almost inaudible, but Vanessa could feel it somehow, a soft rhythm echoing her own. She reached her toes slightly toward him under the table, brushing gently against his side, and he didn't stir, only adjusting his position so that more of his weight pressed into the floor beside her chair. It was a small thing, but it made her heart feel lighter. Perry wasn't the type to demand attention. He never filled the silence with noise. Instead, he filled it with presence. And for Vanessa, that had always been enough. She leaned her elbow against the table, resting her cheek in her hand, and let her eyes half close. The kitchen lamp glowed softly above her, leaving the corners of the room in gentle shadow. In that cocoon of golden light, the world felt far away, as though the night outside were simply holding its breath, waiting patiently while she enjoyed this moment. The kettle on the stove clicked faintly as it cooled, each tick sounding like a slow heartbeat. The refrigerator hummed. Perry exhaled. And in between, silence stretched out, not empty, but filled with quiet comfort. She thought briefly of how different nights could feel. Sometimes the dark was restless, filled with thoughts that swirled and refused to quiet down. But then there were nights like this night's where everything settled into its place, where even the stillness carried a soft reassurance. Tonight, she felt grateful for that balance. Vanessa took another sip, her mug now lighter in her hands. She let the tea linger on her tongue, savoring it, before setting the cup gently back on the table. Her fingers traced the rim absently, not wanting the moment to pass too quickly. Perry lifted his head just enough to blink up at her, his eyes catching the glow of the lamp. She smiled faintly and reached down again, brushing her hand over the top of his head. His fur was soft beneath her fingers, and though he made no sound, she thought she saw the tiniest flicker of acknowledgement, as if he understood the gesture and offered his quiet reply. "Thanks for keeping me company," she whispered. The words weren't necessary, but saying them out loud felt right. The night seemed to receive them gently, folding them into its stillness. Vanessa leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes for a few breaths, simply listening. The warmth of the tea lingered in her chest. The companionship of Perry lingered at her feet. And together they created a quiet, stronger than any wall, a peace deeper than silence alone could offer. At last, she opened her eyes again, noticing the way the light reflected off the surface of her tea. Only a small amount remained, the steam now fainter, but the comfort still present. She reached for the mug once more, lifting it with both hands as if it were a final little ceremony before rest. The last sip was warm, soothing, and complete. She let the flavors stay with her a moment longer before placing the empty mug on the counter. The circle of calm she'd built here in the kitchen didn't vanish, it simply followed her, as though it would accompany her wherever she went next. Vanessa rose slowly, stretching her arms above her head, and smiled at the little sound of Perry's claws clicking lightly on the floor as he stood too, ready to follow. She gave the kitchen one last glance, the soft glow of the lamp, the resting kettle, the empty mug, and then she reached over to switch the light off. Darkness folded gently around them both, and the apartment grew even quieter. The click of the lamp left the kitchen in shadow, but the quiet didn't feel empty. Instead, the darkness wrapped itself around Vanessa like a soft blanket, guiding her steps as she made her way back down the hall. Perry's small footsteps padded after her, steady and loyal, always keeping just close enough that she could sense him without needing to look. The apartment at night had its own personality, calmer, slower, with details that often went unnoticed during the day. The hum of the refrigerator was now a faint background memory. The walls seemed to hold on to sound a little longer, making her footsteps feel softer. Even the air itself seemed gentler, as though it had settled into the stillness right alongside her. Vanessa ran her hand along the wall as she walked, grounding herself in the familiar texture. She didn't rush. There was no need. The night wasn't urging her forward, only inviting her to move at her own pace. Each step felt deliberate, each breath unhurried. Perry, padding faithfully at her side, gave the faintest shake of his head, the sound of his small bill brushing against the air. Vanessa glanced down at him, her lips curling into a small smile. "Still awake, huh?" she murmured, though she knew he'd offer no reply. The hallway stretched ahead, dim but not unfriendly. A soft sliver of moonlight slipped in from a window at the far end, touching the wooden floor with pale silver. Vanessa paused for a moment just to look at it. The glow felt like a companion, a gentle reminder that the night outside was vast and endless, even as her own world narrowed into the quiet of her home. When she reached her bedroom doorway, she pushed it open with a slow, careful motion. The room was just as she'd left it, the blanket slightly rumpled, the glow of her bedside lamp still waiting patiently, casting its amber light across the bed. The air held the faintest trace of her earlier presence, a mingling of lavender and warmth. Perry slipped inside ahead of her, circling once before settling down near the foot of the bed. He didn't curl all the way into sleep yet. Instead, he rested his head on his folded paws, watching her with calm eyes as she moved quietly about the room. Vanessa smiled at him again, touched by how natural it felt to have him there. She didn't speak this time. There was no need for words when the silence was already saying everything. She set the empty mug on her nightstand for the morning, then brushed her fingers lightly across the lamp's base. For a moment, she didn't switch it off. Instead, she simply stood there, watching the way its warm glow touched the walls, the way shadows stretched gently across the floor. It felt like standing in a painting made only of light and calm. Finally, she drew back the covers and sat at the edge of her bed. The fabric was cool against her legs at first, then quickly warmed as she slid beneath it. The bed seemed to welcome her back, pulling her into its softness. Perry, sensing her movement, lifted his head. He gave a small shift, repositioning himself a little closer to the foot of the bed, as though making sure he could keep watch more comfortably. "Good night, Perry," Vanessa whispered softly, her voice already heavy with the edges of drowsiness. The platypus gave no reply, only lowered his head back down with a slow, steady motion, his eyes blinking once before closing. Vanessa pulled the blanket up to her chin and let herself sink deeper into the pillows. The tea still warmed her from within, and the presence of her quiet companion filled the room with reassurance. The night outside might stretch endlessly, but here, in this small circle of lamplight and comfort, she felt completely at home. The calm she had carried from the kitchen followed her still, like a soft echo of warmth that reached into every corner of her room. Vanessa lay still for a few moments, letting the gentle rhythm of her breathing match the quiet pulse of the room. The amber glow of the bedside lamp softened the edges of everything, the folds in her blanket, the curve of the nightstand, the soft outline of Perry resting at the foot of the bed. It was as if the light itself had learned to whisper, filling the air with a calm that words could never quite capture. Her thoughts moved lazily now, no longer chasing after worries or lists of things left undone. Instead, they drifted, like leaves caught on a slow current. She thought of the balcony, the breeze, the way the city had twinkled faintly beneath the stars. She thought of the kitchen, the warmth of the tea, and the quiet company that had joined her there. Each memory was like a stepping stone, carrying her gently closer to rest. She turned her head slightly on the pillow, eyes tracing the shape of Perry's small body stretched across the covers at the edge of the bed. His breathing was even, steady, a sound so subtle it blended into the silence. but knowing he was there grounded her in the best way. Vanessa let out a slow sigh, her eyelids growing heavier. Still, she kept them open just long enough to glance at the lamp once more. Its glow was comforting, but she knew the moment had come to let the night fully embrace her. She reached out from beneath the covers, her fingers brushing over the switch. For a heartbeat she hesitated, watching how the warm halo of light filled the room, wrapping her in its gentle gold. With a quiet click, the lamp went dark. The room transformed instantly, but not in a way that felt cold or unfriendly. Instead, the shadows stretched softly, and the faint silver of moonlight slipped in through the window, painting the room in calm blue-gray. It was a different kind of peace, deeper, quieter, closer to the heart of the night. Vanessa shifted onto her side, pulling the blanket up to her cheek. The pillow cradled her head, and her body melted deeper into the mattress. Every muscle seemed to release at once, as though the dark itself had given her permission to let go. Her thoughts grew simpler still. A line of music lingered faintly in her memory. A shape of a star she'd seen earlier flickered behind her closed eyes. She pictured the steam of the tea rising in the kitchen, blending into the still air, just as her awareness now drifted upward and away. Perry stirred once, stretching his little body before resettling closer to her feet. The faint weight of his presence reached her like a second blanket, invisible, but so very real. She smiled softly in the dark, her lips barely curving, the expression already fading as sleep pressed closer. The apartment was utterly still now. The hallway, the kitchen, the balcony, all resting, and just as she was. The city outside had quieted into a distant hum, softened by the hush of the night, and above it all, the stars continued their silent vigil, unseen but steady, their light traveling patiently through the sky. Vanessa's breathing slowed into the rhythm of rest, steady and deep. The last conscious thought she held was not of the past day, nor of the days to come, but simply of this, the warmth of the blanket, the quiet of her home, and the comforting presence of a teal figure who had chosen, without words, to share the silence with her. And with that, the night carried her gently into sleep. Sleep came quietly, like a tide creeping across sand. Vanessa didn't even notice the exact moment when her thoughts stopped belonging to the waking world. They simply began to drift, softening at the edges, melting into images that flickered in her mind like candle flames in the dark. At first, she was aware only of weightlessness. Her body, though still nestled in her bed, seemed to dissolve as though she were no longer bound by the softness of her blankets or the curve of her pillow. She floated, carried on a current of silence deeper than anything she had known in the waking hours. The darkness around her shifted, not into light but into color muted at first, a wash of violet and blue as though the night sky had pulled itself close to her. The stars she had glimpsed earlier seemed brighter now, clearer, spread across a horizon that stretched farther than her eyes could follow, yet it didn't feel distant or overwhelming. Instead, the sky felt close, as if it had drawn down just to cradle her in its vast, starry arms. She felt her feet touch something not ground exactly, but a surface that rippled gently beneath her as though it were made of light itself. She looked down and saw that she was standing on a path woven from stars. Each step she took shimmered faintly, sending ripples outward into the deep velvet blue around her. There was no hurry here. Each step she made was guided not by destination, but by curiosity, by wonder. And though the dream had no map, no directions, she felt perfectly at ease. The path knew where it was going, even if she did not. In the distance, faint shapes began to emerge. A row of lanterns hung in the air as if strung across nothing at all, glowing golden against the indigo. Their light swayed gently, carried by a breeze she could feel on her skin, cool and refreshing. As she approached them, she noticed they weren't ordinary lanterns. Each one contained something inside a memory, captured in soft, moving images. Vanessa stopped before the first. Within its glass, she saw herself as a child, sitting cross-legged on her bedroom floor, flipping through an old, tattered book of stories. She remembered the way the pages had smelled faintly of dust and something comforting, like safety and time. The image glowed gently, fading as she moved toward the next lantern. In the second, she saw herself on her balcony, much like earlier that very night, leaning against the railing, staring at the stars. But here in the dream, the stars leaned closer back, their light bending downward as if listening to her thoughts. She smiled faintly at the image, her heart filling with the same quiet she had carried with her before sleep. The lanterns stretched on ahead, each one carrying its own reflection, its own gentle reminder of moments she had lived but never fully held on to. The dream didn't feel like it was inventing something new. It felt like it was stitching together pieces of her life she had almost forgotten, weaving them into a tapestry of light. And all the while, the path of stars continued beneath her, patient and endless, waiting to guide her wherever the dream wished to take her. Vanessa lifted her gaze once more to the vastness above. The sky glowed not with a single moon, but many, scattered like pearls across the horizon, each one radiating a soft silver warmth. They felt less like celestial bodies and more like guardians, watching her quietly as she drifted further into the dream. She walked on, and the lanterns swayed gently in her wake. The lanterns grew fewer as Vanessa walked farther along the starlit path, their golden glow fading into the distance behind her. The dream seemed to sense it was time for a shift. The air changed, warmer now, filled with a hush like the faint sound of pages turning. When she looked ahead, the rippling star path curved, and beyond it she saw a shape emerging a house. Not just any house, but one she recognized at once, her childhood home. Yet it wasn't quite the same. Dreams had softened its edges, stretched its colors, and wrapped it in a glow that was both strange and comforting. The walls glistened faintly, as though painted with moonlight. The windows shimmered, showing hints of moving images inside, memories flickering like films across their glass. Even the front door looked different. Taller, arched, crowned with a frame of silver ivy that sparkled under the dream's endless sky. Vanessa hesitated for a moment, not from fear, but from awe. She had not thought of this place in so long. Memories tugged at her as she stepped forward, moments of sitting on the living room carpet, the faint scent of her father's coffee, the sound of distant music drifting from a radio. She touched the doorknob, which glowed faintly beneath her hand, and with a gentle push, the door opened without resistance. Inside, the house was both familiar and not. The furniture seemed larger, dream-sized, the ceiling stretching high as if it had no end. Light filled the rooms, not from lamps, but from floating orbs drifting like bubbles in the air, glowing with soft amber and blue. When she reached out to touch one, it burst soundlessly, releasing the scent of something. She remembered the warm fragrance of vanilla cookies she had once helped bake long ago. Room by room she wandered, and each space unfolded differently. The living room was scattered with fragments of her past. Her favorite blanket draped over the couch, a forgotten sketchbook lying open on the floor, a half-finished drawing still marked in pencil. The fireplace flickered with no fire, but with glowing shapes, tiny sparks of light that danced upward like fireflies, vanishing into the air. The kitchen appeared next, but here it was more dream than memory. The counters gleamed, and the stove hummed gently, though nothing cooked upon it. On the table stood a teacup, her teacup from earlier in the night, still steaming as though she had only just left it there. She lifted it to her lips, and though she felt nothing physical, the taste lingered anyway. Chamomile, soft and floral, the comfort of bedtime returning even here in this dream. As she moved deeper, Vanessa noticed that not all the rooms were hers alone. Some were filled with shadows, not dark or frightening, but suggestive outlines of people she once knew. Friends, schoolmates. Faint voices drifted, muffled but warm, like laughter heard through a closed door. She didn't open those doors, not yet. She only stood quietly, listening, her heart filling with a strange mixture of nostalgia and calm. At last she climbed the staircase. It was longer than it had ever been, stretching upward as though into the stars themselves. Yet her steps felt light, effortless. At the top she found her childhood bedroom. It too was transformed. The bed was still there, covered in familiar patterned sheets, but it seemed wider, more inviting, its blanket glowing faintly with a silver sheen. Posters she half remembered lined the walls, though they shimmered, changing images when she looked at them, shifting from cartoons she had loved to constellations she had studied, to abstract swirls of light. The room itself pulsed with a gentle rhythm, almost as though it were breathing. She crossed to the window, which opened not onto a street or backyard, but onto the night sky itself. Stars stretched endlessly beyond the glass, so close she could almost reach out and touch them. Vanessa pressed her hand to the window pane. It was cool beneath her palm, grounding her, reminding her that even here in a dream, in a place shaped by memory and imagination, she was safe. Behind her she heard a small sound, almost like a rustle. She turned, half expecting to see Perry curled somewhere nearby, though she knew he had not followed her into the dream. Instead there was only her bed, glowing softly, as if inviting her to rest within her own dream. And slowly Vanessa stepped closer. The glow from the dream bedroom wrapped around Vanessa like a quiet embrace. For a long moment she simply stood there, gazing at the bed that felt both hers and not hers, familiar yet radiant, with an otherworldly shimmer. It seemed to wait patiently, as though it had always known she would return to it, even if only here, in this soft corner of sleep. She lowered herself onto the bed. The blanket was cool against her fingertips at first, then warmed quickly, like it was adjusting to her presence. When she lay back, she didn't sink into the mattress so much as drift upon it, as though the bed were made of clouds instead of fabric. Her body grew lighter, her breath steady, the edges of her thoughts loosening once again. The window before her shimmered, the stars beyond shifting, not fixed, but moving slowly in spirals, as though they too had fallen to their own kind of dance. The faint rhythm of their movement lulled her further, until her eyelids closed once more. And then, without realizing, Vanessa slipped deeper still into a dream within her dream. When she opened her eyes again, she was no longer in her childhood room. Instead, she stood in the middle of a vast garden. It wasn't a garden she had ever visited, yet it felt familiar in a way dreams often made things feel. The ground was carpeted in soft moss that glowed faintly under her feet, like stepping stones of light. Flowers rose around her, enormous and luminous, their petals shifting colors as if painted by moonbeams. Some leaned toward her as she walked past, brushing her arms with feather-light caresses. The air was filled with a low hum, not music exactly, but something close, a vibration that resonated gently in her chest, calming her with each step she took. Fireflies glowed brighter here, their light not yellow but pale blue and lavender, swirling lazily in patterns that resembled constellations. At the center of the garden stood a fountain, though no water flowed from it. Instead, streams of light poured upward, rising like ribbons into the air before dissolving into mist. The sound it made was softer than water, like the sigh of the night itself. Vanessa approached, her hand reaching out toward one of the glowing streams. When her fingertips touched it, the light curled around her hand, spiraling gently before drifting upward, carrying with it a fragment of something. It was a memory, faint, fleeting, but hers. The laughter of her father as he once tried, unsuccessfully, to fix a broken toaster. The silly way he had insisted it was just a minor adjustment before sparks had flown. She smiled softly, the memory glowing in her chest like a lantern. Then the ribbon of light carried it away, releasing it into the garden air. One by one, more memories revealed themselves as she touched the fountain. One of them was her learning to ride a bicycle, wobbly at first, before finally balancing on her own. Another was a rainy afternoon spent indoors, listening to the patter against the windows. And one was the quiet companionship of reading a book while the world outside seemed to blur away. Each memory was gentle, never overwhelming. The dream didn't force her to relive them, only to notice them, to see them for the soft, precious moments they were. As she lingered, Vanessa realized the garden itself seemed to respond to her. With each step, new flowers bloomed, glowing brighter in the direction she moved. It was as though the dream encouraged her forward, guiding her deeper into its heart. Soon she came upon a stone archway at the far edge of the garden. It was draped in vines that sparkled faintly like starlight caught in dew. Beyond the arch, she could see only mist, pale and inviting. A path stretched onward, but its destination was hidden. She hesitated, her hand resting lightly against the cool stone. Part of her wondered what lay beyond. Another part knew that in dreams, questions often mattered more than answers. Still, curiosity tugged at her, gentle but persistent. And so, with a breath as calm as the night itself, Vanessa stepped forward, crossing the threshold into the mist. The garden fell away, and the dream shifted once again. The mist embraced Vanessa as she passed through the archway. It wasn't cold or damp, but feather-soft, like walking through the folds of a dream's veil. For a moment she could see nothing at all, only the silvery glow that surrounded her. Then, slowly, the fog began to lift, unveiling a new place, waiting in silence. Before her stretched a vast lake, smooth as glass. It reflected the starry heavens above so perfectly that it was difficult to tell where the sky ended and the water began. Stars twinkled below her feet, as though she could walk across them, and the moon hung doubly bright, once in the sky, once mirrored in the lake's surface. The air here was still hushed, yet not empty. It was full of a presence she couldn't quite name, something vast, serene, watching over her with patience. The ripples of her breath alone stirred the reflection, small circles of silver spreading outward like gentle whispers. Drawn by the beauty, Vanessa stepped closer to the edge. To her surprise, the water didn't lap at the shore as ordinary lakes did. Instead, it held steady as though waiting for her. Kneeling down, she dipped her fingers into the surface. The water wasn't wet. Not really. It felt like cool light, liquid starlight running between her fingers. Where she touched, the surface glowed brighter, forming soft rings of radiance that pulsed outward, spreading across the mirrored lake. And then, as if responding to her touch, visions began to appear upon the surface. First, A younger version of herself shimmered there, sitting on the edge of her bed, sketchbook in hand, lost in thought. The image dissolved and shifted into another, her teenage self standing beside her father, arms crossed, a fond smirk tugging at her lips as he explained some outlandish invention. Another shift, and she saw herself walking quietly down a street at night, the lamps glowing around her, her expression contemplative but calm. The visions weren't grand events. They were ordinary, everyday pieces of her life, but here they gleamed like constellations, each one precious, each one part of her. The lake was showing her what she sometimes overlooked, the quiet strength woven to her own story. A warmth filled her chest, not unlike the chamomile tea she had sipped earlier. It spread slowly, gently, until it touched every part of her, easing whatever restlessness lingered. The dream seemed to sense this change, and the lake responded. From its center, ripples spread, though nothing had disturbed it. The reflection of the stars brightened, until it looked as though the whole sky had gathered there, resting in the water's embrace. Then, as though carried by the ripples themselves, a path of glowing stones rose from the lake, one by one, leading toward the center. Each stone shone with a soft, silvery blue glow, inviting her to step upon them. Without fear, Vanessa followed. Each step was soundless, each stone steady beneath her feet, though they floated upon the starry water. As she reached the middle of the lake, the air shifted again, soft currents of wind moving as though unseen wings brushed past. At the center, no grand monument waited. Only a single tree stood tall, slender, glowing faintly as though woven from moonlight. Its branches spread wide, and from them hung countless tiny lanterns of light, swaying gently, though no breeze stirred. They looked like captured fireflies, or perhaps memories, glowing softly against the endless nights. Vanessa reached out, brushing her fingertips against the bark. It was smooth, cool, and thrummed faintly, with a rhythm like a heartbeat. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, everything stilled. The stars, the lake, the air itself, all of it seemed to pause in harmony. In that quiet, she felt whole at rest, as though the dream had led her here for this one simple purpose, to remind her that peace was always waiting, somewhere within her, even when the waking world felt tangled or uncertain. She stayed there, standing beneath the glowing tree at the center of the mirrored lake, until the dream began to soften again, the stars dimming slightly at the edges, the lanterns swaying slower. And in that fading glow, Vanessa felt herself drifting not out of the dream entirely, but deeper still, toward the final quiet moments of night. The soft glow of the dream's lantern tree lingered in Vanessa's memory, even as the vision began to dissolve into something quieter, simpler. She felt the dream retreat around her, not suddenly, but gradually, like a tide easing back from the shore. The shimmering water, the glowing garden, the misty archways, all of it grew more transparent with every breath she took, fading into the background of her mind until only the sense of calm remained. She did not resist. Instead, she let the dream carry her where it wished, like a leaf upon a still current. Slowly, the world around her became darker, yet not in a frightening way. It was a darkness filled with safety, a velvet kind of night where nothing stirred, where no sharp edges waited. When she opened her eyes, she was back in her own room. The walls were no longer glowing with dreamlight, but painted with the softer, more familiar shadows of her reality. The lamp on her nightstand cast a faint amber halo, steady and reassuring. Her blankets, once shimmering clouds in her dream, were now warm fabric tucked neatly around her. She lay on her side, half curled beneath them, the weight of the covers like a gentle embrace. The chamomile tea she had left on the nightstand had cooled, though its faint aroma still drifted faintly in the air. Vanessa inhaled deeply, and the scent alone was enough to remind her of the warmth she had felt while drinking it. It was as though the tea had woven itself into her, carrying its calm into her bones. On the floor near her bed, Perry stirred softly. The teal platypus had followed her here, not in his secret agent form, but as her quiet, faithful companion. His breathing was even, little more than a faint whisper in the silence, and the sight of him curled up by her side gave her a comfort she hadn't realized she needed. She smiled faintly, too tired to laugh or even whisper a word, but her chest eased knowing he was there. Outside her window, the world was utterly still. The city seemed to have fallen into the same slumber she had entered. No sounds of cars, no distant hum of activity, only the occasional brush of wind against the glass. The stars that had danced so vividly in her dream now twinkled faintly, ordinary but beautiful, scattered across the midnight sky. Vanessa's eyes fluttered shut again, and though she knew she was back in her bed, it didn't feel so different from the dream. The two realms had blurred together the luminous world of her imagination and the quiet peace of her reality. She carried the glow of one into the stillness of the other, and together they wove a blanket of serenity that made her body grow heavier with each breath. Her thoughts, which so often swirled with questions and sharp edges, had softened. She wasn't worried about tomorrow or the day after. She wasn't replaying old conversations or searching for answers. Tonight, all of that seemed far away, drifting beyond reach. What remained was only this: the warmth of her bed, the faint scent of tea, the quiet presence of Perry, and the hush of the night wrapping around her like a lullaby. Vanessa breathed deeply, her chest rising and falling, in a rhythm as steady as the stars. Her body grew heavier still, her mind lighter. She didn't need to hold on to anything anymore. She could simply rest and let the night hold her. And so, without effort, she let herself slip deeper into peaceful slumber. The first stages of sleep wrapped around Vanessa like a slow-moving tide, pulling her deeper with every breath she released. Her body had already given itself to stillness, sinking into the mattress as though the bed itself had grown softer, more cloud-like. With every passing second, her shoulders, once carrying the faintest trace of tension, were loose now. Her arms, draped over the blanket, rested without effort. Even her fingers seemed lighter, almost floating in their own ease. Her mind, too, softened. The crisp edges of thought faded until they became impressions, half-formed images that didn't need to connect to anything solid. A half-memory of her childhood bedroom, a fleeting thought of the night sky, the echo of her father's voice, muffled but fond. Each one rose and fell like waves, brief and tender, never clinging. In the midst of this half-dream, Vanessa felt herself wandering again, though not in the vivid dreamscapes of glowing trees and mirrored lakes. This was subtler, quieter. She found herself walking through corridors of memory, simple ones, unadorned yet comforting in their familiarity. She saw herself as a younger girl sitting on a window ledge with a book in her lap, the streetlights outside casting their orange glow. She saw herself lying in the grass of a quiet park, the sky above her endless and blue. She saw herself sitting across from her father at the kitchen table, a warm drink between them, and despite his eccentric ramblings, she remembered feeling understood, even if only in small ways. Each image passed gently, like lanterns floating on water. None lingered too long, none asked for anything of her. They simply drifted by, letting her acknowledge them, then fade again into the hush of her subconscious. And deeper she sank. Her breathing slowed, so steady it almost matched the rhythm of the night outside her window. Perry shifted faintly on the floor, a tiny sigh escaping him, as if in his own sleep he mirrored her ease. Vanessa smiled faintly in her dreams, though she didn't know she did. The boundaries of her body began to blur. She could no longer tell where she ended and where the warmth of her bed began. The blanket, the pillow, the mattress, all of it felt like one continuous embrace, holding her steady as she slipped further inward. If her earlier dreams had been journeys, places to wander, sights to behold, this was different. This was the kind of dream that wasn't about seeing or doing, but about being. A dream where the only landscape was calm itself, where the only sound was the slow, steady cadence of her own breath. It was here, in this quiet depth, that she felt most at home. No need to perform, no need to guard herself, no need to be clever or cautious, only rest. Only the assurance that the night would hold her gently until morning came. Her heart slowed to match that rhythm. Her mind, once a restless tangle, was smooth and still, like the glassy surface of the dream lake she had left behind. And if thoughts did appear, they were like distant stars, faint, far off, twinkling quietly without ever demanding her attention. The deeper Vanessa drifted, the more she realized that slumber wasn't simply an absence of waking life. It was its own kind of presence, its own sanctuary, a space where her spirit could breathe without weight. She surrendered completely now. There was no resistance, no hesitation. Only the gentle, inevitable pull of rest, carrying her further into the embrace of night. Time no longer seemed to exist for Vanessa. She had passed beyond the point of noticing how long she had been asleep. The world of clocks and schedules and tomorrow's responsibilities had dissolved, leaving only the timeless rhythm of her breathing and the vast, endless sea of her rest. In this depth of slumber, her dreams no longer took the shape of clear stories or places. Instead, they were like brushstrokes on an endless canvas, colors, sensations, whispers of feelings. She floated within them as though she herself were part of the painting, drifting peacefully from one gentle image to the next. At first, she saw soft washes of color, shifting slowly like the aurora across a midnight sky. Deep indigos, silvery blues, muted golds, each one fading seamlessly into the next, flowing with the grace of water. The colors didn't surround her so much as they held her, wrapping her in warmth and coolness, balance and calm. Then the colors gave way to textures. The sensation of grass beneath her hands, though she wasn't really lying in a meadow. The warmth of sunlight brushing her face, though no sun shone here. The hush of water moving gently against her feet, though no shore could be seen. Each feeling was a fragment, a dream's way of reminding her body how it felt to be safe, how it felt to be at ease. Occasionally, faint sounds drifted through the quiet, a lull of wind chimes, so delicate they almost seemed imagined. The low murmur of a stream, steady and unhurried. Once even the softest melody of a voice humming a lullaby familiar, though Vanessa could not say from where. These sounds were not there to awaken her. They were like the night itself, breathing, giving shape to her stillness. Her body sank deeper, so deeply now that she was no longer aware of it at all. The weight of her limbs, the outline of her frame, even the gentle rise and fall of her chest, all had blurred into the sensation of floating, as though she were carried by an invisible current. It was not emptiness. It was fullness of a different kind, a fullness made of peace. There were no questions here, no shadows of worry, no need for her to figure anything out. Here, in the quietest depths of her slumber, she was whole, even if she didn't think of it that way. The dream shifted once more, softer still. Now she imagined herself wrapped in a cocoon of light, a veil of silver threads that shimmered faintly into the dark. They cradled her like a hammock in the air, swaying gently back and forth, the motion slow enough to blur into timelessness. And Perry, even though he was asleep on the floor of her room, appeared here too in the quietest way. Not in form, not in voice, but in presence. A sense of companionship, of loyalty, of something small and steady watching over her, even as she drifted beyond awareness. She felt safe, as though nothing in the world could disturb this cocoon of light and quiet. The deeper she sank, the more she realized that there was nothing left to do. No dream to follow, no thought to answer, no image to cling to. Just the soft, boundless stillness of pure slumber, not empty, not silent, but deeply alive with peace. She floated there endlessly, without beginning or end, without effort or expectation. A quiet star adrift in an infinite sky at home in her own stillness. Vanessa drifted in the depths of her dreams, and the night carried her like a river. She had surrendered so fully to rest that even the smallest trace of thought had dissolved. There was no longer a difference between her body and the bed, between her breath and the quiet air around her. She was part of the stillness now, folded into it as though she had always belonged there. The dreamscape shifted once more, though softly, gently. She found herself beneath a wide, starlit sky. The stars glowed in endless constellations, each one pulsing faintly as though it breathed with her. She walked slowly, and though her feet touched no ground, it felt like drifting rather than moving, the universe itself carrying her wherever she needed to go. Here in this space there was no weight of past or future, only presence, only the gentle rhythm of existence itself. She could feel the night not as something outside her window, but as something within her, a calm, a shelter, a boundless expanse where she could rest forever. Perry appeared again in this dream, though he did not speak or move. He was simply there, sitting quietly beside her, his small teal form steady and familiar. His presence was enough. It reminded Vanessa that she was not alone, that rest was not only for herself, but for those who cared in their own quiet ways. The stars above began to soften, their glow dimming, not with loss, but with the slow promise of dawn. A pale light touched the edge of the horizon, not sharp, not insistent, but gentle, as though even morning knew it must arrive softly, so as not to disturb her. The dream folded around her once more, cradling her as the first traces of dawn whispered of a new day. And in her bed her breathing remained steady. Perry stirred faintly at the foot of her bed, lifting his head for only a moment before curling back into his own rest. The house remained wrapped in silence, and Vanessa was completely at peace. The night had done what it was meant to do. It had soothed her, carried her, given her sanctuary. And when morning would finally come, she would wake refreshed, steady, and whole again. But for now she remained in slumber, and the story gently, quietly, drifted closed. And now, as Vanessa rests in her peaceful sleep, it is time for you to drift into your own. Let the calm she found guide you. Let the gentle rhythm of her night carry you into your dreams. Tonight there is no rush, no worry, nothing you need to do. The world will wait. For now, your only task is to rest. Breathe softly. Let your body grow heavy, and let your thoughts drift like stars in a quiet sky. And as this story comes to a close, may your night be filled with the same stillness and comfort that surrounds Vanessa now. If you like the story, make sure to give this video a like and also subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. Until then, sleep deeply, dream gently, rest well, Good night.